Hey all. All right, the last module, interest group politics. This is the broad introductory video. For the deets, check out those narrated slides. Check out our text on this topic. Check out that super cool video I have posted in that module on the best Congress money can buy. It's a little dated. I think it's from 2008? No, 10? 6? Anyway, it's from the early 2000s. But it's everything in there is even more true today and then some. All right, so things I want to talk about here. All right, first we want to conceptualize interest groups as a mediating institution that helps link we the people with the government. All right, so critical to our democracy. The formulation here is really E.E. Schachtschneider's, a legendary political scientist from back in the day. And that's how he conceptualizes interest groups. And he puts them alongside political parties as another mediating institution that helps connect we the people with the government. And in his estimation, political parties are a better, more democratic mediating institution than interest groups. Anybody can join a political party. It doesn't take money to join. Political parties have a big influence on who can run in general elections through primaries and caucuses. Who influences those party choices? We the people, ordinary Americans. Again, right, that's how Donald Trump got the nomination to run as a Republican for the White House in 2016. Right? The party elite opposed him, but rank and file Republicans and independents thought he was fantastic. All right, so in that sense, political parties are relatively small d democratic and really do help connect we the people with government, right? Because we the people a lot of influence over the government. Interest groups, a bit of a different animal. Typically, you need to pay membership fees to belong to an interest group. Some interest groups are extremely powerful with elite backing, like quintessentially the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Right? All the Fortune 500 companies, as far as I know, belong to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. As if companies like, let's say, what's Elon Musk's? One of his companies, right, is, let's say, Tesla. Right? So as if Tesla didn't already have a lot of political influence on its own, with its own lobbyists, its own campaign contributions to candidates running for elected office, its own lobbyists in Congress and up on Capitol Hill, lobbying the executive branch, right? Engaging in litigation strategies, as if this huge corporation didn't already have enough influence on our politics. It gets even more by joining the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is sort of an umbrella organization that represents a wide range of large corporations. It gives them even more influence. So, So in that sense, right, interest groups are pretty inequalitarian. They tend to promote inequality in our politics, which is, right, a real threat to our democracy. What's a key sort of precept of living in a democracy is that everybody has about the same political influence as everybody else, political equality. Well, that's a little bit of a fantasy, isn't it? Interest groups make it clear that's a fantasy. Some people are more equal than others. If you have a lot of resources, you have a lot of influence. If you have few resources, you have little influence. So interest groups clearly contribute to political inequality in ways that political parties don't necessarily contribute to that inequality. Almost anybody can join an interest group. That's mostly true. But some interest groups are more equal than others, right? Some are extremely powerful. Some are not powerful at all, hardly. They're in the game, but they're not a serious player at the table most of the time. So for all of these sorts of reasons, Schachtschneider was a little skeptical of interest groups. Now, that being said, right, interest groups are protected by the First Amendment, as they should be. We have the right to petition government for a redress of grievances. That's interest groups. And it is important to our democracy. Interest groups are important to our democracy. So, I'm of two minds here. They're extremely important to have. You can't have a democracy without them. They're protected by the First Amendment, but they also contribute to substantial amounts of political inequality in ways that undermine our democracy. So it's both things at the same time. Yeah, what is it? A pluralist would typically argue that, well, anybody can join an interest group. The playing field is level. Sometimes this group wins, sometimes that group wins. It all works out in the end. It's pretty fabulous. And Schatzschneider's like, yeah, you're kind of full of it. Like, you're telling a fairy tale there. What does he say? The flaw in the pluralist heaven is that the interest group choir sings with an upper class accent. All right. A Supreme Court decision from 2009 that gave interest groups even more influence on our politics. Citizens United, right? Defining campaign contributions as free speech and saying that corporations are, for purposes of the First Amendment, they're basically people. They get the same free speech rights that individuals do, as do labor unions, trade groups, etc. All right. So that kind of opened the floodgates of money pouring into our politics. In fact, the Supreme Court in this most recent term issued a decision that leans in that same direction. It said political parties, I believe, can spend essentially all the money that they're currently allowed to spend, and they can coordinate closely with candidates. Before there had been limits on how much they could coordinate with candidates. And who contributes to political parties? Interest groups. So political parties and interest groups, we often talk about them in political science as conceptually distinct. There's actually a fair amount of overlap there. And as to the extent that you can argue that parties are better than interest groups as a vehicle for we the people to influence government, political parties are hardly ideal. I'm sure you already know that. But again, it's a comparative analysis, right? We're not comparing political parties to some perfect alternative vehicle. We're comparing them to interest groups. And arguably, comparatively speaking, they come out ahead of interest groups. Also take note here, and then I'll stop talking. Take note that interest groups, when they petition government for a redress of grievances, they don't just lobby Congress, although that's how we often think about interest groups, right, vis-a-vis Congress. They also lobby the executive branch, all those high officials, including the president, in the executive branch, the head of the EPA, key players within the EPA, the head of the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense, all the high officials within that institution, on and on. And not only, by the way, do they target members of Congress for influence, they also target their chiefs of staff. Those are players in Washington, D.C. that people know. If you're chief of staff for Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, if you're chief of staff for Senate Majority Leader John Thune, or any other key leadership officials in both the Senate and the House, if you're chief of staff and run their office day to day, you are a player in Washington politics, right? You're the person that member of Congress hires to run their office day to day. Members of Congress fly at 60,000 feet for the most part. Who handles the micro details day to day? Chiefs of staff. Who is a target of lobby influence on Capitol Hill? Chiefs of staff. They're like stars in Washington. Out here, right, in Las Vegas, we don't know who the heck they are. But in Washington, D.C., these are known people. They're big deals. Interest groups also lobby the courts in a way, right? We know they lobby them here in Nevada because, like most states, right, we have judicial elections. So interest groups, typically law firms and corporations, right, contribute to judicial campaigns. We've talked about that, seeking to influence who gets elected. But you can also, right, in a sense, lobby the courts by bringing cases to the courts, sponsoring cases. That's Brown v. Board of Education, right? A legendary case. Did the Brown family have the money to sponsor a litigation campaign against Topeka, Kansas Board of Education? Heck no, right? It was the NAACP that stepped in and said, we're an interest group interested in advancing the cause of racial equality here in America. We think the fact that your little girl, your little black girl, has to walk extra distance to get to an all-black school when an all-white school is much closer, we think that's bogus. We think that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. We know you can't afford to litigate this in the federal courts. We can. We'll provide the legal expertise. We'll sponsor that litigation all the way as high as we can get it. And if we can get it to the Supreme Court, so much the better, which they did. Who was lead counsel for the NAACP in that case? None other than Thurgood Marshall, who ends up becoming the first black justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, put there by Lyndon B. Johnson in, I believe, 1967. That's an example of how interest groups can lobby federal courts and state courts through litigation campaigns. On behalf of conservative causes in many cases, sometimes in behalf of more progressive causes. It's all over the map. Although right now, especially the federal courts, are much more open to conservative claims and litigation, much more hostile to progressive causes and cases. All right? And then lobbyists also can, in a sense, lobby we the people through public opinion campaigns. I remember way back in the day when the NRA, the National Rifle Association, was trying to argue that the right to keep and bear arms should be a universal right that attaches to all Americans, all adult Americans, not just members of well-regulated state militias. They went right to we the people. I remember reading newspaper editorials written by either NRA peeps or people contacted by the NRA, writing these editorials in newspapers across the country to make this argument to we the people. Because if you can move we the people on an issue, you can move the levers of government down the road. All right. That's what I got for you. Thanks for listening. Last module. Take care.